We really appreciate your presence and your contribution as well. We will now have Ms. Khin Ohmar of Progressive Voice. Please join me in inviting Khin Ohmar, who's the leader of the Progressive Voice. Khin Ohmar, you have 7 to 10 minutes. It's all yours.
Thank you, Honorable Charles Santiago and all honorable representatives. Thank you very much for having me and also holding this very important event. As you are well aware, in the over a year and 4 months since the Myanmar military staged the coup attempt, the ASEAN has categorically failed to address the political and humanitarian crisis on the ground in Myanmar. And I will focus on ASEAN in my presentation to you today, because I see that the ASEAN 5-point consensus is something that the whole international community, including the United Nations, has deferred when it comes to Myanmar crisis to solve. And I think that's quite problematic for the people of Myanmar at this point. The ASEAN 5-point consensus was formed without the people of Myanmar, without the civil society, ethnic revolutionary organizations, and especially the legitimate government of Myanmar, the National Unity Government. And it has not been implemented even after 1 year. The problem even more so is that the junta itself, who promised, has repeatedly ignored it and has been openly defiant against it. While we welcome the news of the military junta leaders' exclusion from the ASEAN summit in October, no other substantive actions been taken since, further emboldening this junta to continue their scorched earth campaign across the country. At this point, we find the 5-point consensus has become irrelevant to the crisis on the ground in Myanmar, and thus we demand the ASEAN and the international community who defer Myanmar crisis to ASEAN, including the UN, to move beyond this failed 5-point consensus. Myanmar crisis is multi-layered, and ASEAN alone is not equipped to solve it. Since Cambodia has taken as ASEAN chair, the process has gone further derailed as the Cambodia's Prime Minister lending the junta legitimacy without pushing compliance with the 5-point consensus as a prerequisite of the engagement. As ASEAN stagnates, the junta ruthlessly pursues their all-out terror campaign on the people. As of 21 June, they've killed at least 2,000 people in cold blood. The actual number is quite likely to be quite higher. 14,213 people being arrested, 11,151 people being currently under detention, 1,131 people being sentenced in prison. Of them, 114 are sentenced to death. That includes 2 children. Recently, the junta has issued an execution order on 2 long-time democracy activists, Jimmy and Phyo Seattle. Cambodia recently told the junta to refrain from executing these activists. It is too little and too late. Hun Sen's rogue diplomacy towards the junta and failure to hold the junta accountable has emboldened this junta to ignore the Cambodia's plea. The junta continues escalating its scorched earth campaign, burning tens of thousands of houses, massacring civilians, using advanced weaponry from fighter jets and helicopters, gunships to conduct airstrikes on civilians, including the internally displaced people and the children. The junta is burning homes as a collective punishment as in their retaliation against the people's defiance against them. Since the attempted coup, the total of 12,687 houses being burned in Sagaing region alone in central Myanmar, end of May. So locals on the ground saying that there are no more houses left to burn in Sagaing region at this point. Now, I would like to bring your attention to the humanitarian crisis because it is really further deepening at this point. Time is not on our side. The more time that passes, the more suffering that occurs on the ground. Yet the humanitarian response been very, very slow, particularly from the ASEAN. Under the 5-point consensus, ASEAN Coordination Center for Humanitarian Assistance on Disaster Management, the AHA Center, has been tasked to respond to this crisis, but it is quite problematic for several reasons. The AHA Center, first, the AHA Center is mandated and designed for disaster relief, but not for a complex man-made humanitarian political crisis. Second, the AHA Center lacks independence as they will seek the approval from the junta to distribute aid. Third, the junta has shown time and again that they are not a partner for the distribution of the aid, but they actually are the one block, destroy, and weaponize the aid to their own benefit, own advantage. The AHA Center has also a poor track record in Myanmar during the Rohingya crisis back in 2018, serving the political aims and accepting the military propaganda while the military continued committing the genocide against the Rohingya. Former director of the AHA Center, Ms. Adelina Kamel, has recommended to suspend the participation of the junta in all decision-making processes and activities, including the provision of aid. So we have proposed the ASEAN and the international community to take the alternative approach, which is to facilitate cross-border aid, working in partnership with local humanitarian organizations and civil society in full respect of the agency of local communities, and also to apply funds directly and flexibly to local humanitarian organizations so that they are able to respond effectively to the crisis on the ground. And also to, like we also have recommended that working with the junta is breaching humanitarian principles of impartiality and neutrality, and also the principle of do no harm. And that is something that we are very sad to see that our calls continue to fall on deaf ears. We are extremely disappointed also in the UN for their inability to move beyond rhetoric and to take concrete actions against the junta. Therefore, the UN is continuing, in that case, UN is continuing its legacy of systemic failures in our country as they have failed during the Rohingya crisis. You can also look at how the UN Rosenthal report already lay out this internal systemic failure of the UN in Myanmar. Civil society and the UN human rights mandate holders have repeatedly made it crystal clear what's happening in Myanmar, but the UN continue to be ineffective to stop the violence or to address the root causes of the crisis, which is the junta. The Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Myanmar already said that war crimes and crimes against humanity are being committed every day by the junta. Thus, we have called on the Human Rights Council to look into all possibilities to establish a jurisdiction to bring about justice and accountability. The UN General Assembly needs to fully allow the participation of the Ambassador Jomoton, the legitimate representative of Myanmar people, in all levels of the UN. But it's very disappointing to see that even the Human Rights Council, which is taking place right now in Geneva for its 50th session, didn't allow Ambassador Jomoton to represent his country and his people at the human rights body. So the idea will be of course, the idea that we see, the solution will be for the Security Council, UN Security Council, to adopt a resolution on Myanmar, and yet the Security Council has continued to fail to respond to the crisis, to curb the horrific violence. And we even when we, of course, we welcome the Council condemned the junta, but this is the highest body of the United Nations to deal with the security matter, and yet even to issue a statement, they are not able to do because of China and Russia shielding the junta with their veto power. So in closing, honorable representatives, I would like to actually propose that overall, the international community really need to unify against this military junta in Myanmar and stand in solidarity in full-fledged with the people of Myanmar to fulfill their will and democratic aspirations. The international community really need to take action through not lending the junta any legitimacy on the international stage, including within the UN platforms and other international intergovernmental events. The international community, led by the UN and UN Secretary General, must coordinate in immediate humanitarian response to assist the suffering people on the ground through the local humanitarian actors, through cross-border channels. And this is the best way to serve the people. And we really need your support for this to help us amplify our calls to make sure that it's really happen sooner rather than way too late. Additionally, the international community really need to facilitate also the political solution, but that has to be starting with the legitimate government of the country, other key stakeholders such as the ethnic revolutionary organization, civil society, and members of the Spring Revolution. But the very most important thing is with the precondition of cessation of the junta's terror campaign against the people and release of all political detainees. That has to be the first precondition, minimum condition. Targeted sanctions must be applied to the junta, also their affiliated businesses and their cronies, and also to cut the junta's access to fund and ability to buy weapons. That's very important that we are advocating for. Additionally,
Thanks, Ms. Khin Ohmar.
global arms embargo and sanctions. And we really also want to see your support to the ICC to accept the National Unity Government's declaration of the Article 12, that is accepting the court's jurisdiction. So thank you so much. Sorry for my delay time.
Thanks, Ms. Khin Ohmar. Are there any questions from the inquiry committee to Ms. Khin Ohmar of Progressive Voice? Any questions? Well, if there are no questions, let me pose a question to you, Khin Ohmar. You have used very strong language in describing the 5-point consensus. You have said it's ineffective, it has become irrelevant, people are suffering as a result, and there's open defiance on the part of the government of Myanmar, or at least the military of Myanmar. What would you suggest is the way forward? You clearly have said that ASEAN has not stepped up to the crisis. The 5-point plan is just a waste of time. The UN is just useless in solving this problem. So what would be your approach, political approach, and of course, the humanitarian approach that you would recommend as a way forward?
The way forward that I'll recommend is for the countries, like-minded countries, to form allies and really work together. Like, for example, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, India, and these are the neighboring countries, also sharing the border, and thus the people are fleeing. Myanmar people are fleeing into the countries like India and Thailand. And because of all kind of reasons that we can actually set from 1 to 10 for why we see that ASEAN 5 points are no longer relevant and cannot move forward as the ASEAN 5-point consensus. The points are still relevant, but that can be carried out by the actors, independent, like-minded actors in alliance together, like-minded ally front. That's what we are looking for, and that needs to be also brought into that group. Needs to be brought. The UN Secretary General, for example, himself need to be brought into that like-minded actors group together. I think that's the only way forward. Otherwise, I think we just keep delaying the time while we will keep saying that this has been failed again and again, and yet at the same time the crisis on the ground further exacerbates.
A quick sentence on the humanitarian support for the border areas, which is just I heard is devastating at this time. And the UN recent report that came out last week says it's a crime against humanity the way children are dying. Quick, what should happen now?
I'm sorry, I wasn't clear about your question.
A quick statement or a quick response on the humanitarian support that is required in the border areas involving children. And as the UN pointed out last week, that there is a crime against humanity that is in place in the border areas of Thailand and Myanmar.
Yes, that really this is the situation on the ground. There are crimes against humanity taking place, war crimes are taking place, and that's why I think it's so important that we will, with your help, remind the neighboring countries like India and Thailand that these crimes are actually the obligation, international obligation, especially for the neighboring countries, that the neighboring countries have that international obligation to save the lives of the people of Myanmar. I think that's something that need a constant reminder at this point, because neighboring countries seems to be also quite held back, more looking into the junta or working with the junta to solve the solution, rather than working with the legitimate government of Myanmar and the other legitimate stakeholders of the country. And that is where the root of the problem that I see to address.
Thanks, Khin Ohmar. Any follow-up questions from the inquiry committee?
Yes, Chair, I do.
Kwanka, you want to go?
Thank you very much. In light
Before
of
Kwanka, let me
okay,
just also welcome Kwanka from South Africa. And I also see Congresswoman Ilhan Omar who have joined us as well. So the both of you, welcome aboard. Go ahead, Konka. MP Konka, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. My apologies, I had connectivity issues. I couldn't join in for the past couple of minutes. No, I had the explanation about the failure of the ASEAN bloc to implement the 5-point plan. But then I also had the explanation around the role that the international community should play. But my question really would be, is it at all possible, given all that has happened, is it at all possible for, say, the military and the NLD and other pro-democracy interest groups to work together towards defining the future or determining the future of Myanmar? If yes, in what kind of circumstances and environment that cooperation would be? If no, why not? Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your question, Honorable Representative. If I can be very, very frank and honest with you, the international community had a chance to get Myanmar onto that right track, but there were a lot of shortfalls in the last 10, 11 years of the country's opening, where the international community will be given more focus on the top political actors, while not including the traditionally marginalized, oppressed minority communities, whereas the civil society was threatened by the repressive laws, where the international community were not able to lend much support for the protection of the human rights defenders. And I think especially also, particularly in the peace process, where the international donors, the international peace donors, were lending both the political and financial support to the military's one-sided peace agenda, which is only to further embolden and strengthen their power grip in the country through that so-called peace process. I think there were a lot of mistakes happen over the last decade time, which we missed also. That means we missed many opportunities. At this point, when the military, when the Rohingya genocide, when they committed the Rohingya genocide, the international community actually failed to take the action to hold them accountable. And all of this in combined further embolden them to do what they are doing now, such as like staging this coup attempt. So if to answer to your question it is that solution of like a Myanmar military, where the Myanmar people, the future Myanmar that they are sacrificing everything they have to set out to achieve, may include the Myanmar military as a part of the country's military component under the civilian control. That is the only way for Myanmar to move forward. And in order to do that, that is the very reason we are calling on the international community to hold this military to account by law, international law, because that's the only way that we can bring this military come under the civilian control, where Myanmar set out to establish a federal democracy where all these ethnic communities, for decades being suppressed by this military, will have a chance to run this country in collective leadership as civilians together. And that's the only way, if I may say. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Any last question from the inquiry committee to Khin Ohmar?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Congresswoman Ilhan.
Thank you. My question is just quick. It's about looking at justice mechanisms. How can international actors, including governments, support justice for victims and provide redress for the junta's crimes?
Thank you so much for this, Madam Congresswoman. Yes, there are the victims and survivors of the military violence are uncountable at this point, and they all need really serious help. But we are facing one very challenge from the international donors is when we ask for help for these victims and survivors of the military violence, we find that international donors rating, I don't know what is the right word, but international donors' rating of the people who are in need of help on the ground are quite challenging for us. For example, if I may give you one example, when the civil servants who are defiant against this military junta, who refuse to walk under the military junta, are now chased down by the junta. They've been arrested, sentenced, or like tortured. When they have literally, they lost everything. And their families are also being targeted to be arrested and imprisoned alongside with them or without them when they run to hide. So we need help for these civil rights defenders. We need these civil rights defenders. They are defending their civil rights and their political rights. But the international donors see that, oh, these are the political activists. They are political, and therefore we cannot support them. We cannot give the funding for them. And that's very disheartening for us to see that, because these are the people who sacrifice all their lives to change their country's political system so that everybody can live in liberty and peace and freedom. And yet international donors see them because they are political, they should not be supported. And that is something I just want to share with you, that example. These victims need full-fledged support from the international donors, regardless of what they, whether they are political activists or civil society or humanitarian actors. After all, they are in this fight together, unitedly against this military junta, and they need all the support that they can. Like, it's so hard for us to see when, of course, we really are very happy to see the Ukrainian people getting support from the international community. And we're not even getting 101% of 1% of what the Ukrainian struggle is getting the support. We are so happy for them. We are in solidarity with them. And yet we are so sad that our people, our country is not getting the support that we need to topple this military junta who has zero regard to the human's life. Thank you.
Thank you, Khin Ohmar. If we have further questions, we will write to you. And if you have other issues that you would like to raise with the committee, do communicate with us. Thanks for that passionate presentation and very informative. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Thank you.